Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you very, very much for making time to join us today. I know this event has been massively oversubscribed, so thank you very much for your interest. We are kicking off the new year with our session on the COMBI behavioral science method. And today I'm joined by my colleagues from Social Change, who will tell you all about the COMBI and how they've applied it in different contexts in the public sector. The usual kind of housekeeping rules before we start. So as always, please remain muted until it's your turn to speak. As I mentioned, we will start the session with a presentation, but there will be, I hope, plenty of time at the end for you to ask your own questions, and we can have much more of a discussion at the end. If you do have burning questions that occur to you during the presentation, please do put them in the chat, and we will answer them during the Q&A session. But for now, if there are no other questions from the audience, I will stop sharing and hand over to Kelly. Kelly, over to you.
Thank you, Genta. Thank you. Nice to see so many on the call today on this, what is a rainy Monday, actually, up here in Lincoln. So yeah, hello, welcome to today's webinar. So we're here today to give you an introduction to the COMBI model of behaviour change. But just before we get started, just to give you a little bit of an overview of who we are and what we do. So first of all, my name's Kelly Evans, and I'm the Chief Executive at Social Change UK. And I'm joined on the call today by Dr. Rachel Langbin, who's our behavioural scientist and insight specialist here at Social Change, and also Daisy Graham, who is our senior social researcher and data analyst, and is a whiz and also a bit of a geek with the data and absolutely loves the COMBI model. So this is absolutely fantastic for her today. She's going to talk us through that in a bit more detail. So I'm hoping some of you might have heard of us before. So we're Social Change. We're a certified B Corporation, and we're actually 14 years old today. So it's our birthday. But I've been in this space and in the behavioural science space now for over 20 years, working in central government, local government, and so on. And here at Social Change, we have four main functions really. And the first is our research and behavioural insights function, of which Rachel and Daisy are core members of that team. So we work with a lot of different clients around behavioural insights, doing all of the research to come up with some interventions and ideas for behaviour change, and we just focus on behaviour change. We're also social value pioneers, and so we work with our clients to really understand social value and looking at social return on investment in particular. And of course, we turn a lot of our recommendations and interventions into campaigns and solutions for our clients. A lot of behavioural marketing, or social marketing as some people know it as, is something we also do in our team here. And finally, our Changemaker Academy, which is our offer really. It's our offer to the public sector. It's part of our purpose-driven culture. It's to upskill everybody in behaviour science and behaviour change, and how we can use it to do some good. So it's brilliant to see so many on the call here today. So we're going to explain how we can use some of these tools and techniques, including COMBI, to deliver some positive social change. So just to give you an overview of what we're going to cover in this next 30 minutes. So as I said, we're going to give you that introduction to the COMBI model of behaviour change, but we're also going to throw in a few other tools and techniques and how we use them alongside COMBI, and most importantly, how we put COMBI model into practice, because we love the theory, but we're actually practitioners. We're about how do we use some of this theory, some of this research and understanding around behavioural science, and how do we put it into practice and actually make a difference. And so that's what we do on a day-to-day basis. We're practitioners at heart. So we're going to give you a few examples of how we've used that model in practice. And as Genta said, we're going to have some time at the end for loads of questions and answers. So if you've got projects that you're working on or thinking of working on, or how you could use behavioural science, but in particular the COMBI model, hopefully we'll be able to answer some of those questions for you at the end. So before we go on to the combi model, some of you might be familiar with this model. This is our process. It's the double diamond. And the double diamond is a visual representation of the design and innovation process. And it's a simple way to describe all the steps that are taken in any innovation project. And this is what we use. We start with the problem, and we're all here to try and find a solution. And we go through this little journey, which the double diamond is our framework for doing that. So it starts with really discovering what the issue is, defining the problem, and sometimes we have to go back and again until we really understand what the problem is. And then it's about developing and delivering something by testing and learning and adapting to get to that solution. And so, as you can see in this particular framework here, the combi model sits in that first diamond. It's right at the beginning, it's in the research stage, but we have those other tools and techniques that we also weave into our double diamond process from getting from problem to solution. So as I said, we're going to talk today specifically about combi, and Rachel's going to talk about a couple of the other things in that first diamond as well, such as Eastern Mind Space. So I'm going to hand over to Daisy, who is going to talk us through the combi model of behaviour. And what we've done to describe this model is think about environment and particular waste management, waste reduction. But of course, we can use this across lots of different topics and issues. And as I said, we work in environment, crime reduction and health-related behaviour change. But for the focus of today, we're going to start with environment. So I'm going to hand over to Daisy.
Thank you very much. So as Kelly says, I'll be taking you through the combi model, really what it is, what it aims to achieve, and how it can be used to help maximise effective behaviour change interventions. So first of all, before thinking about this model, we need to think about, well, what actually is behaviour? What is the thing that we are trying to change with this model? So Davis et al. Describes behaviour as essentially anything someone does in response to internal or external events. So these actions might be observable and therefore directly measurable, or maybe more covert and something that you can't directly measure. And essentially behaviours are physical events that occur in the body and are controlled by the brain. So thinking about some examples. So thinking about those overt, directly measurable behaviours, we have a few examples here. So getting a vaccination, going to a recycling centre, taking part in an exercise class. So these are things that you can really directly see happening. So you can almost count them, and that's why it is directly measurable. So thinking about going to a recycling centre, you know someone is engaging more in those circular waste disposal behaviours if they've switched from going perhaps never to once a month, or perhaps from going once a month to a couple of times a month, or even weekly. So you can see that positive change happening. However, thinking about those more covert behaviours, those that you can't see, we can look towards more those internal processes. So thinking more positively about vaccinations, planning how you can be more sustainable in waste management processes, and thinking about, well, what do you need to do to perhaps be more active? So these, because they can't be directly observed, require some different tactics to try and measure their change. So for example, surveys, interviews, focus groups, conversations with people to find out how those thought processes and attitudes have changed. And this is where combi model can really be an invaluable tool. So adapted from Michi et al. In 2011, the combi model essentially proposes that there are three key components to someone being able to effectively engage in a behaviour. So those components are capability, opportunity, and motivation, hence the COM in combi. So it essentially proposes that people need to have the right capabilities and opportunities and motivations to engage in that behaviour, and without it, may not be able to do so, or may do so in a way that isn't sustainable. So the analogy I quite like to use, bear with me, is thinking about the combi model as a table. So you've got 4 table legs. With all 4, that table stays up quite strongly. It can bear the weight that's been placed upon it. But you take away a table leg, it's still standing, but perhaps less stable, and maybe might not be able to bear the brunt of the weight that gets put on it. And the more and more table legs you take away, the less stable it becomes and less able to be a table. So that's essentially what combi model proposes, and it can really help you in identifying, well, what capabilities, opportunities and motivations do people have? And where are those challenges that are perhaps preventing them from engaging in the behaviours we want to see? So as Kelly mentioned, we've adopted COM-B in a wide range of different social issues and different research projects. But for the examples, we're going to stick with that topic of waste management. So really thinking about how COM-B can be used for those waste management behaviours. So now I'll take you through each of the three components and actually their subcomponents as well to really give you that overview of the model. So first of all, we have capability. This refers to the extent to which someone has knowledge, skills, and ability to be able to engage in that target behaviour. The first component is physical capability. So really thinking about, for example, strength, physical skills, and mobility. Can people actually do the behaviours that we want to see? So for example, with those waste managements, are people physically able to get to recycling or reuse centres? Are they physically able to carry the materials and waste they want to dispose of? Looking towards psychological capability, this refers to sort of understanding, awareness, knowledge, and that sort of attitudes as well. So for example, in the waste management space, do people actually know what can be recycled or reused? Again, that understanding of circular and circular waste management. And are they actually aware of what disposal centres are out there that they can use to engage in this behaviour? Next, we have opportunity, which really refers to the role of external factors in making that behaviour possible. The first subcomponent is physical opportunity. So that really looks to our physical environments and what is there that helps us engage in the behaviour. So for example, infrastructure, services, time and resources. And thinking again with that waste management example, are there actually local recycling and reuse centres people can go to, or are they far away? Do people actually have the time and the transportation means to get to them? If they can't get to them, then instantly that's a main barrier for them to be able to actually engage in these circular behaviours. And then the other subcomponent is social opportunity. So really thinking about our social environments, thinking about norms and what is socially acceptable and socially desirable. So is recycling and reusing waste and materials the norm? Is it widely accepted in social circles? Is there something of a status symbol around being engaged in waste more circularly? Because if that is something that puts you with a high standing in your social circle, people will want to engage with that more. And that quite nicely leads us on to the final component, which is motivation. So that very much links into our internal processes that influence decision making and behaviours. So again, two components within that. We have automatic motivation, which is almost that gut instinct and that reflex, that instinctive response when faced with something. So for example, with again waste management behaviours, can people simply be bothered to engage in these behaviours? Is it too much effort for them to go to these centres, to do different behaviours, to engage more in circular waste management? Or would they rather just stay at home and chuck something in the general waste bin? Then we have reflective motivation, which is more about logical reasoning, bringing in past experiences, thinking about pros and cons. So what do people see as those pros and cons for circular waste management? If they put in that effort of going out of their way, perhaps, and doing those behaviours, well, what do they get out of it? And this exchange is something that's really important when wanting people to engage in these behaviours. Yes, they see it as something that perhaps requires extra effort from them, but they want to know what they will get in response to doing that. So as a very quick summary, that is the COM-B model in essence. And what's really fantastic about this model and why I love it so much is that it is a very interactional one. So the components and behaviours don't work in isolation. They actually influence one another and can be used in tangent. So for example, thinking about, again, with waste management, if the opportunities are there for people to go and recycle and reuse locally, they're aware of them, then they're going to be more motivated to do it because, well, they simply can. So, you know, this is something that I want to do and I can do it, so I'm going to do it. So immediately we get that behaviour happening. But actually engaging in that behaviour itself can also reinforce those COM elements and have that cycle of reinforcement to keep sustaining that behaviour. So by simply going to a recycle reuse centre, for example, and engaging those behaviours, they have that sense of, you know what, I've achieved this, I can do this, I have those capabilities, opportunities and motivations to do it, I know I can do it in future, and it keeps that positive cycle, which is why it's so important to ensure as much as possible all three of these components are in play. And you can use these to do behavioural audits, so really understanding, well, what capabilities, opportunities and motivations do people actually have? And within which of these are there those barriers? It could be just the one, it could be two, it might even be all three, but it really helps you to understand where to focus your interventions. And then, not to touch too much on what Rachel will cover in very shortly, then you can use the behaviour change wheel, which really aims to be informed by COM-B to understand, well, what interventions are needed and how can they be delivered to be able to deliver that effective behaviour change. And now I'll pass on to Rachel, who will be able to go through different types of models and frameworks and how we use them alongside COM-B to help facilitate effective behaviour change.
Thank you so much, Daisy. So hopefully Daisy's overview has given you a feel for the COM-B model as a whole, why we'd use it, potentially when we would use it. And what I want to do is not take you away from that core topic and focus of today's webinar, but actually take you kind of on a few steps to some different kind of behaviour change models, like the behaviour change wheel that we can lead through to after using the COM-B, but also a couple of other frameworks that we commonly kind of embed within the work we do to really try and strengthen the impact of the behaviour change that we initially help people to enact and hopefully help them to maintain as well. So if we start with a kind of overview of these different ones that we use, whilst the COM-B is, as Daisy's sort of kept describing it, a behavioural audit, it helps us understand kind of what barriers might exist currently to the behaviour being enacted, or maybe what is facilitating somebody towards that behaviour, what's actually now required for that behaviour to take place over the long term. Whilst that's the kind of initial starting point, we then need some additional building blocks to get to the point of an intervention. And the behaviour change wheel is a brilliant model to help us map out what are those capability, opportunity, motivation barriers, and therefore what are the various types of interventions available to us to target them. So really it's a framework of different intervention types that can be rolled out to encourage uptake, maintenance, and essentially keep that behaviour going, and ways that we can deliver that under kind of different policy categories, which for you yourselves in the public sector will be really important for you to consider. You know, what is actually suitable, feasible and available and kind of accessible for you to do. So really the behaviour change wheel is how can we promote the behaviour, encourage it, change it and sustain it. But once we've developed those interventions and we're thinking about how we actually then want to implement them, it's really important to draw on other tools like Mindspace and East. And both of these were models or kind of frameworks developed by the Behavioural Insights team, which is also known as the Nudge Unit. And initially they developed Mindspace, which is one of my favourites. So Daisy is very much a COM-B queen and I am a Mindspace advocate. I think they should be paying me because I literally will talk to anyone about Mindspace. But it is 9 of the most robust influences on human behaviour. So whether we like it or not, regardless of who we are often subconsciously or unconsciously influenced by these key 9 elements. And helpfully, it does kind of fit into this mnemonic of Mindspace. And really it helps us understand how we can use behavioural science to inform messaging, inform how we're speaking to people about a behaviour, and essentially promote that behaviour to them. A few years after Mindspace was developed, the Behavioural Insights team identified that actually that could be further distilled into a slightly more actionable framework and, again, mnemonic. I'm a big fan of mnemonics. So then they came up with EAST, which is 4 key ways that you can increase the likelihood of a behaviour being enacted. And EAST stands for making it easy, making it attractive, social and timely. So really it tries to establish how we can do that to try and reduce those barriers that might exist in COM, so the COM-B, to uptake of that behaviour. And I'm only going to, because of interest, in the interest of time, I'm only going to be able to give you a really brief insight to each, and I'm going to do so kind of with that waste management behaviour in mind. So starting with the behaviour change wheel, this should look familiar if you were watching a few slides back. So you'll see at the core of the behaviour change wheel, we have the COM-B. Now that is why COM-B is so important, because you can't just go around throwing intervention ideas into the mix when you just know you've got a problem behaviour without that middle point of understanding the COM-B, and then obviously conducting some research to understand and identify those core elements. But let's say we have done that. We have conducted some interviews, or we've done a survey to establish some key trends into waste disposal behaviours, perceptions, and then we've done some more in-depth interviews or perhaps even focus groups with people. And the highlight core theme coming from that is that people just don't understand nowadays what they can recycle, what they can't, where they can recycle it, and so on. So that is a psychological capability issue. So once we know that, we can really drill down on what types of interventions are going to be most suitable. And this is where, if you look to the right on the model, I think it's really kind of key for me to mention that whilst the purple lines do sort of segment that those COM elements into separate sections, the green ring are intervention types that can be applied regardless of what component we're focusing on. So in the case of psychological capability, it's knowledge that's lacking. So a really kind of hopefully obvious starting point might be an educational campaign. We want to give people that knowledge that they might be lacking. Where's their nearest reuse point of the kind of packaging that they are consuming or using? And what we could also use is kind of embedding principles of persuasion. So utilising persuasive communication to try and influence people's attitudes, resonate with key audiences, and tap into, coming back to the COM-B, motivational elements as well, talking about the environmental impact they can have by reusing, but also potentially the financial impact, which I'll come on to when we talk about the EAST framework. So if we move on to just a few examples, so these are some that I've kind of seen recently. I think there is a little bit of broken English on the left there, but you should be able to get the gist of that one being trying to tap into people's emotions and essentially saying your undesirable littering behaviours can have this impact on the environment, on living beings. So that's sort of an example, jumping slightly ahead, but where an affect element, which is the A in Mindspace, has been used to try and tap into people's emotions. If we then move on to the penguin in the middle, I don't know if anyone else remembers these from childhood or still gets drawn towards these and likes to put their rubbish in these bins. This is sort of an incentive and also a salience. So this is the I and the S in Mindspace. It's something colourful, it's something playful, it's something that people will be drawn to, and it's slightly more appealing to put your rubbish in the mouth of the penguin, although I'm now having kind of a more complex thought about the impact on animals and the environment, so maybe this isn't suitable anymore. But it draws people's attention to it rather than just, oh, that's your average old rubbish bin. And then even more gamified on the right, we have a really recent example. So when Barbie and Oppenheimer, or Barbenheimer as I think it was coined, were kind of new in cinemas, this was a really good example of how a bin or kind of waste behaviour was kind of used to help gamify people disposing of their waste. And obviously there was a counter on how many people had opted for Barbie and how many people had opted for Oppenheimer. So it kind of just distracts people away from the actual focus of, oh, I must recycle my litter. It's, oh, I can play a bit of a game here and try and notch up the amount of kind of likes on the film that I preferred. Mine was personally Barbie. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment which side they'd be on, but we'll move on from there, again, in the interest of time. So Mindspace, as I've kind of alluded to, I would happily do an entire webinar on this, but I haven't got the time. So just to tap into a few of those, I've mentioned things like salience, so that's drawing our attention. We're really kind of drawn to things that are novel, maybe humorous, colourful. But we're also hugely influenced by the M, which is who communicates information to us. By affect, our emotions, but also by default. So what's our go-to habit that we're just used to doing over and over again? So if we move on to kind of that in practice, if we think about a few components we could use with Mindspace in a kind of waste disposal example, let's say researchers identified that financial barriers can prevent people from purchasing sustainable or reusable products. And you might be able to relate to this. It might actually be a real life example for you. So people tend not to want to buy those kind of sustainable products if they are a little bit higher in price. So an intervention idea might be that with your kind of regular recyclable, but maybe not ultra sustainable, reusable constantly packaging, you could introduce a deposit return scheme. So you pay kind of a flat fee within the price you pay for your product, but you will get that back, that deposit, if you go to a refuse point or return to the shop you bought that in and return that and essentially recycle it. So what that does is taps into loss aversion. It also utilises elements of mind space such as incentives. Obviously, you might get some money back. You should get some money back if you go there. An affect of avoiding that negative emotion of losing money. So we'll be more motivated to try and avoid that negative emotion and feel like we've kind of lost out on money that was quite rightfully ours. So then moving on to my final kind of framework, and again, an example, sticking with our sort of waste disposal example, is the East Principle. So as I described earlier, the 4 components here are to make a behaviour kind of easy and implementable over the long term. It needs to be easy. We need to show that it's attractive, worth engaging in. It's social, it's something that people can do with other people, or other people are doing it, which should motivate people, and timely. And that's really one of the most important ones, which I'll come on to in the next slide, is we need to target behaviour change when people are actually primed to be thinking about it already, or they're in that sort of pre-contemplation stage. They need to be somewhere where, you know, they're able to engage in that behaviour in the first place. So to put that into practice, a really good example, which I'm sure you will have seen, particularly if you are London residents. I think a recent example I saw in London is in Lyon, which I know is everywhere. It's like the new Pret, really. There is a Lyon on most corners. And they definitely do have sort of coloured bins. And that's a really good example of, it's timely, it's in a place where you might have finished your, what's the really popular one? Tunicado. I think I have tried that one. Oh no, I'm not thinking of Lyon. I've just mixed Lyon and Joe and the Juice. It was in Joe and the Juice that I saw this. But essentially they had really clear symbols and different colours for the different bins of what you could recycle where, essentially. So this is a way that we focus on that kind of attractive element, salience as well from mind space. If people's eyes are drawn to those bins, they've got a clear icon, they're not having to read reams of information, and they know where they need to put their different products, for example. So that can really help to increase recycling rates because it's really easy, clearly communicated information. So with that, I believe that is my section complete, and I will let Kelly bring us slightly back to those first few stages of the COM-B model and how we've used those in practice kind of in recent projects.
Thank you, Rachel. That's great. Thank you so much. So as I mentioned at the beginning, you know, we're practitioners at heart, and you know, we like to make sure we put all the theory into practice. So we're going to give you a couple more examples of how we've used the COM-B model. As I said, we've talked about the environmental space and how we create positive social and environmental change, but we also work quite a lot in health related behaviour change, and working with different communities, target communities. So the first example that I wanted to talk about today is one where we worked in Wales, and as you probably are aware, there are still a large number of people who are digitally excluded, and with so many public services now that are predominantly online, and also private services such as banking moving out of our high streets, many people, often vulnerable, are not getting the help and support that they need and are getting left behind. So we worked with Digital Communities Wales to explore through research the barriers to using technology, and the COM-B model was our starting point for this. So we took scoping, we did surveys with residents and stakeholders, and lots of interviews as well. And in this case, what we found is that people from ethnic minority communities and those that were seeking asylum or permanent asylum in Wales, we discovered that actually they didn't have as much confidence to actually use technology and also to go online, and it was mainly confidence over skills that affected their capability. So a lot of people feeling that they couldn't do it, and actually, as mentioned, Rachel mentioned default in Mindspace. What we found is that the default in this particular example is that many people are asking their family members to do it for them, to get them online and to do the work for them, fill out forms, use their banking and so on online, rather than actually doing it. So we, you know, working with that kind of insight, we looked at the opportunities to see how we could skill up people with that low capability or that low confidence, and also more importantly how we worked with the organisations supporting those communities to make sure that the support infrastructure was in place for people in Wales to do that. And we discovered through using COMBI in our research stage that there was motivation to change there, and we wanted to utilise those levers, those opportunity levers, and that was that many people did want to connect with their friends and family online. So that was their first motivation. If we could get people motivated and online and engaging with their friends and family, that then they would feel greater confidence in order to use public services and to do many of those tasks online. Another example is the work that we have done with Active Lincolnshire as well. Sorry, just going back, there was a slide there just with some of the resources that we designed for the organisations that were supporting those, working with those excluded communities. But moving on to our other example, we worked with Active Lincolnshire to help promote walking and cycling. So again, during our research phase, we did lots of research and scoping, worked with the community in Lincolnshire to really understand what are some of the barriers that are stopping people from taking up walking and cycling in the county. And then we use those behavioural insights to create a multi-channel behaviour change campaign. And some of the COMBI insights that we discovered through that is that actually a lot of people thought that their ill health or their capability in terms of their physical capability, they weren't able to participate more in walking or to take up cycling. So many felt that actually they felt too ill or too weak in order to do that. A lot of people didn't know where and how to go about that if they wanted to start cycling, and many of the barriers are around that ability to want to try as well. So we looked at their capability very much so for this particular example and this particular campaign we designed to make sure that we increased people's capability in particular in order to start walking and to consider cycling in the county. And then finally, just because I know we're talking to a lot of people in London at the moment, we have just started work with West London Waste Authority, and this is a project we're just getting started, which is delving into the behavioural insights around waste across West London, and that involves, again, we'll be using the COMBI model as our tool to begin this particular project, which will involve lots of research, surveys with residents and professionals, undertaking lots of interviews in order to come up with those behavioural insights. And we will be exploring many of the questions around capability, opportunity and motivation that Daisy raised in the earlier part of the webinar. So we will hopefully have a lot more of those answers once we've completed this piece of research. So there's just a few examples outside of waste. We've got absolutely tons more on our website. So if you do go to our website, you'll be able to see every project that we undertake. We make sure we upload as a key resource for people to look at the different projects where we have obviously facilitated that behaviour change and delivered a positive social impact. So please do go and take a look. And as mentioned right at the start, we have that Changemaker Academy, and every month we send out a newsletter with lots of key insights and also future training sessions and opportunities and so on. So if you are interested or you've been interested in what we've talked about today, please do go and sign up. I can happily send a link just to make it easier in the chat for people to log on to. But we're going to open the floor now to some questions. So I think, as said at the beginning, if you could pop those into the chat, we'll take a look at those and hopefully be able to answer any of the questions that you might have. But thanks for listening to us today.
Just to say thank you very much to all of our presenters. I feel like I've learned so much, not only about the theory of COMBI, but also how it compares to other models of behavioral change, and also, you know, how you've applied, how these things can be applied in real life scenarios or to solve real life problems. So thank you very much for that. Yes, we will share the slide deck and a recording of the session afterwards with everyone who signed up. I think you've got a couple of questions. I think, do you want to take a look at the chat and maybe take those? But just to say to everyone, please do feel free to jump in, unmute yourself, and you can ask your question that way as well, if you wish to.
Thank you. I'm just looking at a couple of questions in the chat at the moment. So Matthew put a question here, so I'm just going through that at the moment. But something that just came out straight away from that particular question was about how to move beyond this traditional model of policy plus training plus guidance, which I agree that is the traditional approach to doing things. And I think, some things have worked, certainly in my experience over 20 years. I can probably say we need to do things a bit differently now. There's the dial needs to be moved. We need to try different approaches to changing people's behaviour. And as sort of Daisy mentioned right at the start, really, it's no point jumping straight to the interventions or ideas of what we think will work, and actually starting with people, really understanding them, what makes them tick, what's the thing that is driving the behaviour, whether it's positive or negative, and working with that. And sometimes that means us going back again and back and being iterative in our approach, which is why we love the double diamond, because sometimes it takes a long time to even get to that solution, because we're having to go back and back again, because actually the problem is not the problem you first thought it was. And I'll give a really good example again with waste. A lot of people think the problem is that we're sending everything to landfill, and we've looked at fashion, for example, more recently when we were working with RAP. And actually the problem isn't that the fashion is going to landfill. It is a problem, but it's not a human problem. The problem actually is around fast fashion. It's a completely different issue. It's that wanting to consume and not to reuse and not to participate in those circular behaviours, which is then leading to the problem of more clothes going to landfill, for example. So we started off with the problem being landfill, and actually ended up with the problem being actually our feelings around fast fashion and wanting to consume in the way that we do when it comes to fashion. And we need to rethink the problem, because the problem you think you've got is probably not the problem it is once you've gone through this really robust process of understanding people using double diamond, combi, and all the various tools we've talked about today.
Yeah, and Kelly, I'm happy to sort of take the next one and lead on from that, because I think with organisational behaviours, and feel free if that person's sort of talking about organisational behaviours, and I've seen a lot of thumbs up as well, if there are particular examples of things that you'd want to investigate, we would still apply that same process. So like Kelly said, as the majority of our work that comes into us is commissioned by local authorities with a health-related behaviour problem, maybe crime reduction is the focus. So the majority of our work is in those areas, but we would take that same process if you were wanting to find out about people's hybrid or remote working behaviours, and you would want to initially do some scoping, maybe look at local areas and how they are operating. I'm going to run with this one, but if anyone else wants to add a different organisational behaviour in, please go for it. But essentially it's about consulting your organisation, understanding what's going on, as I say, elsewhere, but also internally, and then I'm talking to the people who work within it, because without their input, without their insight, you could be going, as Kelly has just described, down a totally different route, because you're just starting with a solution that you think you might need to implement. And again, that's where you would build through after doing that research. Maybe it is a big staff survey, but then it also leads into some interviews, some one-to-ones with line managers and their staff members. But that would then get us to that kind of behaviour change wheel point of, is it that we're needing a completely new guideline? Is it that we need another new policy? Are people not understanding the current policies that are in place? Or is this actually totally different, and there's an education piece, like we've said, with campaigns? So really it is that same focus. I don't think we've got an example that we could kind of get up on screen for you right now, but we do work with organisations as well in different kind of aspects of their own organisational behaviour, or working with children and young people and influencing their behaviour. So it really is kind of across the different spectrum, but it's that same model or mixture of different frameworks that we would kind of utilise throughout. So I hope that's kind of, at least in part, answered that question. And obviously Kelly or Daisy, you might want to add to that.
I was just going to say, just to follow on from that, it's a really good question as well. And actually, a lot of clients over the years have come to us with the problem being that we need to solve it with the community, or the end user, as I call it, or the person that they wanted to see the positive behaviour change. But actually, sometimes once we've done the research, sorry, I think I can hear lots of children or something in the background. Sorry. So yeah, sorry, just to go back. What we've often discovered is that actually it's not that person that needs to change first, it's the people that are influencing that behaviour or can help to make that behaviour change possible. So a really good example, done a lot in sexual health over the years. Years ago, it was very much, we need to do a campaign to promote LARC, long-acting reversible contraception, particularly to young women. And actually what we found when we did the research is that, yes, we could do a campaign to really promote LARC with women, but actually the people we really needed to change once we'd done the research is actually the healthcare professionals, in particular GPs, who actually were the barriers to enabling the prescription and to help women to think about their options when it came to contraception. So actually it shifted from the campaign not being with women directly, but actually being with healthcare professionals. And we've had the same. I've done 2 decades working in smoking and tobacco control, and again it was about delivering brief interventions, particularly in smoking in pregnancy. Who are the messages and the key facilitators to that behaviour change? And so actually a lot of our work has been done with professionals and organisations and the people supporting those people in those communities, rather than a B2C directly to the public type of campaign and initiative. So yeah, it really depends. But yeah, as Rachel said, you've got to really think about who is it that needs to change, and sometimes it's not the people you think it is. And the only way you're going to find that out is by doing the research, undertaking a COMBI behavioural audit as we've described today, and then you'll discover that probably your problem is very different to the one you thought you had at the beginning.
I think just to jump in and just add to that in terms of the examples, the one Kelly raised earlier within Digital Communities Wales, that was also a really good example of working with organisations to understand the barriers they're sort of facing in supporting audiences. So these organisations were very trusted voices within the communities, not necessarily focused on providing digital inclusion, but are working put that within their ethos and want to really work towards that goal. And the research really highlighted there was a lot of passion for helping people to become confident in using devices and getting online, but they themselves were struggling with some knowledge and confidence. They wanted to work with others, perhaps didn't know where to start, and this is where the sort of Digital Communities Wales then implemented a pilot which we sort of promoted and evaluated and helped inform with those recommendations, whereby it was almost like a train the trainer type thing. So they helped organisations upskill in getting online, give them all the knowledge that they need and tips and guidance and advice on being able to then cascade that down to the audiences and the communities they worked with, to ensure that there was that opportunity there to improve capability and improve that motivation to be more online and using sort of digital devices as well. So again, just like with any social issue with audiences, there are a massive range of applications like internally within organisations as well.
One of the questions on here is when you have a problem that you're trying to solve, what makes you choose a particular model? That's a good question. And the answer is we don't choose one and we never rely on one. For me, it's a fusion of the different types of models and tools and approaches. So that's why we like to use the double diamond as our sort of process, our journey, and then we look at different tools for different topics and different issues. But overall, you can apply all of these tools to whether you're solving an environmental, a crime reduction, or a health and social issue, really. We've tried and tested them over several years, and yeah, we feel the ones that we've chosen, which we've outlined today, are the most robust and the ones that have worked the best in the work that we've done over the years. Hope that answers that question.
I was just going to add to that and say different models and frameworks can really complement each other. So last year actually, we ran some research in Lincoln to really explore happiness and satisfaction. What are the local challenges people are facing? And we really modelled our findings against Maslow's hierarchy of needs, understanding what needs were being fulfilled and which they needed more support in fulfilling to help them be as happy and satisfied as they possibly can be. And the COM-B model was really helpful in showing, well, psychological capability is a key barrier. Motivation is a key barrier because people in today's world are really focused on survival, and with cost of living crises and political, economic crises and health crises, the motivation is to focus on that rather than ensuring that they are being the best that they can be and reaching that happiness. So it tends to be that a COM-B model is a really good foundation supported by the behaviour change wheel, Mindspace and EATS, but always looking towards those other models to think, well, what can this add? If we're exploring where people are at in their behaviour change journey, using the trans-theoretical model to think, well, what stage of change are they at? Are they thinking about the problem? Or is it not even in their mind? So do we need to encourage them to start thinking about it? Who do we need to encourage to act? And who do we need to help keep acting? So as Kelly said, it's using all the tools at our disposal to really support one another, and rather than sort of compete, it's how can they add value to each other?
And I think just to add to that, or maybe a segue to the next question, is around what's your approach for assessing the capability element of the COM-B method?
Yeah, so I'm happy to jump in there because there's a few elements there where capability is asking people about their current knowledge of something. I think we're quite conscious, particularly when we do work in areas that are quite personally sensitive to people. We might be asking them about their drinking behaviour of alcohol and whether they know how much is unsafe to drink or, considered high risk, for example, or with that big piece of work with violence against women and girls, we're asking people, what they consider to be unsafe behaviour or whether they thought something constituted violence at all. And so our starting point tends to be a kind of large insight survey. We're massive, particularly me, advocates of qualitative research, so that's actually doing things like focus groups and interviews, but a survey that's quantitative and extremely anonymous. Not that those other methods aren't, and I'll come on to those, but with a survey, we can really explore quite a lot of information about how much people know without them being exposed in any way. They're not having to speak to us on the phone or on a Teams call. They're not having to speak within a group. They can submit those answers in the comfort of their own home with absolutely no kind of identifiable information, and we can give that a mix of kind of closed questions that are really easy to answer, or allow them to kind of have that open dialogue, well, not dialogue, but kind of in-depth insight into what they're actually experiencing. So I would say a survey is a really good starting point to understand what that initial knowledge level is, without any kind of inadvertent shaming of an individual to say, oh, why didn't you know that, or this is really obvious, or you should know this, or letting any of that kind of come into the mix. So I think that's always a really good starting point, but also to touch on those other methods, there are always ways in which we do ensure one of our highest priorities is to kind of protect people's psychological well-being. So we will always kind of make adaptations to our research materials, or kind of have different options available to people if we are, say, going to conduct focus groups. Somebody says, I really want to share my insight, but I'd much rather have an interview with you, for example. We kind of have other ways in which we can work to obtain that initial information. But I think there are a variety of tools when it's capability that you can actually kind of pull on to really delve into varying levels of what people know currently and perhaps what they haven't heard before, for example. So I don't know if, again, Kelly or Daisy want to add to that at all, but that tends to be our starting point.
No, I think that was a good summary there. I wasn't going to answer that. Yeah. I think there's another question on here, which is the last one, or nearly last one. There when it comes to behaviours in an organisation and influence and change, to what extent does the COM-B model need to be adapted, e.g. with leaders, end users and managers? They have different motivations and drivers. I mean, it's interesting, but I wouldn't say that you need to that you need a different COM-B model for leaders and managers than you would with end users. The COM-B model is a great framework, but probably in the analysis side of things, you might use segmentation, for example, to really understand different leaders and different approaches and different motivations that they might have. Daisy, what would you echo that, or would you challenge me on that one?
Like, you read my mind. With COM-B, it's not a case of you have to reach a conclusion of this is the one capability barrier that people are facing, this is the one opportunity, the one motivation, because actually it can be quite multifaceted and there can be many things at play. For example, with opportunity, again, people might not have the time to do something. They might also be sort of worried about what others will think. So, for example, where we've done quite a bit of research into accessing sexual health services and what's acting as barriers to people being able to do so confidently and efficiently. And there was that opportunity barrier of, well, there aren't any local services. The best service requires a lot of travel and I have to take the bus and I just don't have the time to do that. But also long-standing social fear of social stigma and judgment around actually needing to access a sexual health service was at play. So across different audiences, there might be multiple barriers within those three components at play. And as Kelly says, you can do that sort of wide-ranging research to identify all the different barriers that are there, relate them to different audiences, and then adopt approaches like segmentation to identify those key audiences and say, for this audience, what are their most prevalent COM-B barriers? So what are the ones that are perhaps most significant to them? And then you can use the behaviour change wheel to think, well, for this audience, what did they need to help facilitate that change? So it's really about understanding those nuances between those different types of COM-B components and also across different audiences, because we are very much believers in that behaviour change isn't a one size fits all. So that's why understanding these different elements and how they change in significance and prevalence across different audiences really are key to being able to develop those different initiatives that really are relevant and that most importantly work.
Yeah, and just on that final one, again, I'm sure maybe others will want to add to this, but I'm definitely not going to, I was going to say sit here, I'm actually standing at a standing desk feeling quite virtuous, but wanting to sit down now. But I'm not going to stand here and say that we ever managed to minimise, the kind of likelihood of somebody answering untruthfully. But often one thing that we do with a lot of our work, because it does require a significant portion of somebody's time, is we offer research incentives, so maybe a shopping voucher, or at least with our surveys a chance to win a shopping voucher. So there is an element of incentive there to kind of give your time, and really there should be no reason that people give an truthful answer, but it does still happen. And I would say one thing we try and do really is use kind of a very open and non-restrictive language, because what we know from behavioural science is that if you're just telling people what to do, more than likely they're just going to switch off from it and kind of engage in reactance. So they're going to do the opposite of what you want them to do. If you show that they've got a choice and just say, these answers are optional, you will be able to progress through to these other questions, but we would really appreciate your insight, as this is a personal topic for a lot of people. It's a problem we're really hoping to solve. If you give them that option, they might be feeling more inclined to want to give you that information. And if you've again given that kind of preface of you will not be identifiable in any way, or if we use insights from this work, we will use a pseudonym, not identify your name, for example, any of your demographics. It's just sometimes softening that language to remind them they are safe, assured, and cannot be associated with those answers themselves. So whilst that will never kind of minimise the chance of somebody being untruthful or a few people being untruthful, I think it will support some people to kind of go through that process in a more truthful manner. And
just to add to that, I think all of that combined can actually make taking part in research quite an empowering opportunity for some people. Like I know in particular, for example, with researching to access to sexual health services, and when we worked on a project exploring violence against women and girls and how we can sort of help reduce that, what we really found is towards the end of conversations and interviews, people were glad to have the chance to share their experience in the hopes of seeing a change happen and being able to help others. And I think that's something that shouldn't be underestimated, is the impact it has on someone, on being able to feel like they've contributed to something and that they've helped make, you know, if they've had a bad experience in the past, they're helping make those bad experiences less and less and helping to ensure that doesn't happen to other people in future. So it really is a mix of, as Rachel said, those incentive vouchers to thank them for their time, ensuring of that anonymity, and then also just really reinforcing the value of their participation, what it's going to help to achieve. People genuinely want to give their answers to help make things better.
Thank you very much for that. I think that's a wrap. Thanks once again to all our presenters. I found this session incredibly helpful and fascinating for all the good reasons. Thank you very much to all of you for giving up your time to join us today. I will share the slides and the video recording afterwards. And then just one last call, that our the February session of this type will be is already planned.
You've gone on to mute, Genta.
Okay, I've put the link in the chat for our next Innovation Lunch and Learn session. I think that's my mouse is going rogue there, but just to say thank you very much to everyone, and hope you have a good rest of your Monday. Take care, everyone.